It's Dr. Darian Parker here on the far side of fitness. And today's far side topic is the anatomy of a training session. You might be thinking to yourself, this doesn't sound very cutting edge, or this isn't something that's really out there for us to discuss. But just think about it for a second. For all of my fitness colleagues, how often do you guys actually talk about what you do in your sessions? Maybe you talk a lot. I know I don't with my fitness colleagues. We talk around training about what are the clients we have and our clientele and just some general concepts around our methodology and approaches to training. We don't actually really talk about the sessions. And obviously everyone's session's a little bit different because we all have different clients. They all have different needs and they come to you very differently each and every time. So what you're doing in those sessions could be completely different, especially based off of your intake and assessments and just way things are going that particular day. I want to break that down because I don't really think we break down the training session, but I want to do it in a different way and in a way that I think will be very different for everyone listening to this. This is for my colleagues and also for clients as well to think about where we're going with this here. We're going to break down the anatomy of a training session into 6 ways. The first way, when we break down the session, is always thinking about safety first. And I think about this not just in how I keep my clients safe and do no harm, but I also think about the legalities of it. I think not enough of us as personal trainers think about the legal implications of what we do. And in fact, I think the majority of us don't really give much thought or pay attention to legal cases that happen with personal trainers. And there was a recent one that was pretty big about negligence of a personal trainer. I believe it's in New York City. If you just look it up, negligence personal trainer, there's some great stuff there you can find out. But this is something that was really pushed into me quite a lot in one of my first classes in my master's degree. I don't remember the exact name of the course, but it's essentially legalities of fitness management or something to that effect at James Madison University. And our professor used to give us court cases, and we look at the documents of injuries that happen in fitness facilities. And so understanding what a reasonably prudent personal trainer would do is part of the standard of care. So I always think to myself when I start a session, what is my basic standard of care? And I really think about that as how am I crafting this so that my clients are safe, but also how am I crafting this so that I am protecting myself legally as well, because no one wants to be in litigation, but litigation is a real thing. And so we have to protect ourselves with that. Now, also, I always have general liability insurance as well that renews every December for me. Actually, I use Canopy. They've been really great for that. So certainly make sure you have your liability insurance, but also think about the anatomy of this session. And number one is safety. Do no harm, but also protect yourself legally as well. And ask yourself, what would a reasonably prudent personal trainer do during a session? So hopefully that helps with number one. Let's go to number two when I'm breaking down my session, which I call the opening act. And this is really a big part of catching the feels. And for me, what I mean by that is I want to get the feeling of what my clients are feeling. When they come on, I read their body language initially. Now, when I say come on, I do a live virtual personal training. That's 100% of my business. But even when I was working with clients in person, the first thing I did was not think about what my program design or what I had planned for them. And we'll talk about that coming up here. But what I did think first was I count the feelings. I assessed how my clients feel. I look at how they walk into the facility, or in my case here, how they show up on camera. For you, maybe they're walking the facility. I look at their body language. I listen to the sound of their words when I ask them how things are going. I do a check-in. How is their body feeling? That's another big thing. Asking your clients, how are they feeling physically? Ask them how they're feeling mentally. We may have a minute or so where we're just chatting about that, how they're feeling. I catch their feelings. And then the other thing I do in part of my opening act is ask about my performance. How did you think I did last time? What was my performance like? What did you think of the workout before? I think a lot of trainers are often scared, like anyone, to ask about your performance because you don't want to feel rejection. But one of the best things you can do is get feedback about your performance. So I do that always in the beginning. I think it's really important. Not every single session, but I do that most sessions to gauge what my client's feeling for that. So number two, the opening act, Catch the feelings. Asking about your performance or ask your clients about your performance is important. Number three is progression or lack thereof. So, in terms of planning my session, I no longer write down anything that I'm going to do. I haven't done that probably in 15 years. I've been in the business like 24 years, training clients regularly. And that is because for me, training is very automatic for me. Once I get a feeling of where a client, how they're feeling, and what the day is going to be like. Because listen, you may have all these plans, you may have written down all these great ideas, programs, sequences. Maybe you're doing compound sets, maybe you're doing supersets, maybe this is part of your periodization plan, undulating periodization, linear periodization, all the jargon, all the stuff, right? All those things. Those are great things. But sometimes you have to pivot. Actually, a lot of times you have to pivot. And part of the anatomy of the session is understanding what you can and can't do with your client after you understand how their body feels, how they feel mentally, how they're doing socially, emotionally, spiritually. Excuse me, all those different things are part of breaking down the performance and designing your program. It's good to have things in your mind. It's good to write down things. If you feel like you need to write down your programming for each and every client, go for it. For me, I always have concepts, and that's mainly because I base my progression off of physics. I use physics and biomechanics almost exclusively to figure out what I'd like to do. I have a concept of what I want to do, and then from that concept, I automatically download the exercises I'm going to do. I know the progressions. Now, for me, that's easier just because I've been a trainer for so long. This just comes to me very quickly. And so it just downloads in my brain. For you, especially beginning trainers, you may need to write down everything you're going to do. And over time, you may have less of that. But having training flexibility or programmatic flexibility is really important within the session. So your progressions may be immense, especially if you have very seasoned clients who know what you're doing and their level of work capacity is really high. For beginners, you're often going to have a lot less progression, very simple exercises, eventually progressing to more complex exercises for that. So that's something to really think about for that. So planning your session often is involved with not planning your session. And a lot of that too is based on the fact of your experience with working with people. So to write it down, not to write it down, that depends on your experience level and things of that nature. But progression and lack of progression is something to really think about. The nuts and bolts of your session is really going to be based off of what's happening that day with your client. And you won't know that unless you do an inventory in the beginning. Just to refresh here, the anatomy of a session on an outline, as I see it, but is going to be different for some people, depending on the people working with, is understand your safety, understand it from doing no harm for the client, understanding your protection legally. What's the opening act like? How does the session begin? This is something, it's like a show and a performance that is genuine in nature. I don't like when trainers say that I'm putting on a performance. This is something that implies that it's fake. For me, it's a very genuine performance. I make sure I delineate that. It's certainly what I mean. It's certainly my personality that I'm exhibiting in this session. The fakeness of that performance shines through. Clients understand that, they see that. So catch the feels of what's going on for your clients and ask them about your performance. Okay. And then the number three, progression and lack thereof. Really important in planning your sessions. How that works for you is going to be different based off your seasoning, how long you've been in the business, things of that nature. But I like to have concepts and ideas, and then I let my knowledge of kinesiology, biomechanics, physics, levers and pulleys guide my progression for that, along with how my clients are feeling that day. Number four is showing your knowledge just enough. During a session, often most of the conversation is not about your knowledge. It's not about talking about anatomy, physiology, chronic adaptations, acute adaptations, the electron transport cycle, Krebs cycle, all this stuff. Yeah, all this great stuff. This stuff is good to know, but rarely used during sessions, and primarily because clients do not care about this. All right. Clients want to talk to you often about what their life is. But I do think it's important to show your knowledge just enough. And you can do this by how you cue people during exercises. For instance, I do a lot of hip mobility while moving laterally or moving in the frontal plane of motion. See what I'm doing here? I will talk to clients about that. All right, our next exercise, we're going to do hip rotation with lateral movement. We're going to do that going all the way down to the end, about 10 yards. And then we're going to turn around, same thing, hip rotation with lateral movement. Then I may say we're going to do hip flexion 90 degrees with an adduction at the hip as well, while moving in more of a sagittal plane motion or moving forward for that. I'm showing my knowledge just enough. In between that, I'm also just BSing about stuff that's going on in their life, in my life for that. Interspersing your knowledge between talking about Netflix recommendations and things of that nature, family life, so on and so forth. It's important. The other aspect when I break down the session number 5 is being relatable. Don't be weird. All right. Be relatable. People love working with people that they feel a sense of kinship to. This is probably one of the biggest factors for my success as a personal trainer and 23, 24 years now. I've had tremendous success having clients well over a decade. My longest running person is now 18 years. And I really attribute that to not just my knowledge, which is just the price of admission, but the part of the anatomy of this session is the anatomy of relatability. If you can be relatable to clients and you know how to talk their language, no matter what that is in different ways, and you come off as someone who's easy to be around, you're going to have client retention. You're going to have long-term client retention, which is more financial stability for you. So that's something that's really important. While breaking down the session, number 5, a big part of the entire thing is being relatable. How relatable are you to the people you're working with? Now, as we're wrapping up this session, we're getting to the final act, right? And I say the thing about this final act is always be closing, like the ABCs, right? In sales here. But in this sense, it's a different way of selling, but you're still selling. And for those of you who are trainers or fitness professionals, say, I don't like selling, I'm not into selling. Too bad. You're selling yourself all the time. All of life is pretty much marketing. And this is selling. You're always selling yourself by your performance. Every session is a selling point. Every session is a marketing opportunity. It doesn't have to be presented that way, but every session is a judgment about how well you are as a trainer. So always be closing. Always understand where you're at in the session and how you want to end it, and ending it in a way that clients feel really good about the time they've had with you. So one of the things that I always talk about is I always have a running conversation while moving my clients during their session and making sure that I have a good exercise progression based off the concept we're working on for that day, the flexibility of that concept, and then making sure that I'm interspersing that with just enough of my knowledge while also talking about things that they're really interested in. If you do that, the final act will be that you have closed during the session because you have talked about it regularly and you've created a sense of time dilation. And what does that mean? The sense that time exists differently during your session. So if you're talking about things clients are interested in while keeping them moving, providing a good exercise progression, the client's going to feel like this time just flew by. And they'll often tell you, it's over already. That went so fast. You know why? Because you are always closing during the session each and every time. So let's review this real quickly. The anatomy of a training session. Again, as a disclaimer, yours may be very different based off of the people you're working with, but I'm trying to provide pretty high level information that any trainer can take and use. So 1, safety, yours and theirs. 2, catching the feels, asking about your client, how they're feeling physically, mentally, socially, emotionally. Ask about your performance. How am I doing? 3, understanding their progression or lack thereof. Maybe it's more deloading, maybe it's an increase in intensity. How you do that is really based off of 1 and 2. 4, showing your knowledge, but just enough. Don't make it overly technical. Make it interesting. Be relatable. Number 5, don't be weird. And don't try to show your knowledge all the time. Clients are just looking for a companionship-based relationship, a confidant relationship, and results-based relationship. Being relatable, being connected will lead you to a very deep connection with the people you work with. And in the final act, is understanding you're always selling during the session, what you're doing, all the factors you bring to it lead you to client retention. If you can do that, you have broken down the session into something that's very successful. Now all you got to do is just repeat that like gazillions of times. And if you do that over and over again, people will stay with you, because the one thing I know about people is it's very difficult to change. People struggle with change. But more than anything, people love working with people they care about, they find relatable, and they know we're going to keep them safe. Today, in the Far Side of Fitness, we talked a little bit about the anatomy of a training session. I hope your training sessions are going well. Take this for what it's worth, use it for yourself, but I appreciate your time. And this is always an awesome time discussing training sessions, something we don't discuss enough, the actual mechanics of it. Thank you so much for your time. And I'll see you on the next episode of the Far Side Fitness.